Your information station, WTIM.
Good morning. You're listening to WTIM, your information station, and our morning show. It's brought to you by People's Bank and Trust, where they put people first, and Landmark of Taylorville. I'm your host, Grayson Bauman, and joining us in this segment, I've got State Senator Steve McClure. Senator McClure, good morning. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Grayson. Good to be with you.
Well, I'm glad to have you here to talk a little bit, first and foremost, about some of the bills that have been signed into law now that have made their way to the governor's desk. I know you've been tracking those for some time. We've talked about some of these bills and your feelings on them, but now that they're signed into law, I'm excited to hear what you've got for us here today. The first of which I believe was just signed into law yesterday, the transit bill. We talked about that one, but this one is really not a great deal for downstate. I'm wondering what you're making of that transit bill now that it's signed into law.
Well, it's not just a bad deal for downstate, it's a bad deal for the suburbs. It essentially makes it so that all of us are going to be paying higher taxes, and there's a road fund designated for roads and bridges, which mainly affect downstate. It was funded, 55% of that fund would go downstate. It comes out of the gas sales tax. And now we're seeing almost $500 million rated out of that fund to go to bail out Chicago mass transit. And also, the tolls are going to increase in the Chicagoland area as well to pay for that. And with all the issues that the Chicago Transit Authority has had with, let's just say, poor experiences for people that are using the trains, smells, safety issues, they're not going to raise the fare at all on the Chicago trains. Instead, they're just going to cause all of us to lose funding for roads and bridges and also cause people to pay more money in taxes in other areas. So it's a very, very bad bill. And it's kind of ironic because Governor Pritzker was just in Springfield a few days ago talking about getting a couple of $1 million to try to fight homelessness. And he tries to act like he's some sort of a downstate hero. And then the next right after that, he goes to Chicago and signs a bill that robs downstate of $500 million. So very bad deal for downstate, and not only a bad deal for downstate, but a bill that is just rampant with issues because it doesn't force the Chicago Transit Authority to reform at all. Instead, just gives them a new bucket of money, and it's a very poorly run system, and there are lots of issues with it, and the governor decided that none of those issues should be fixed. Instead, he's just going to steal money from everywhere else in the state. And to me, that was quite a poor move, and I think it's going to lead to not only us losing essential funds to repair roads and bridges, it's also going to cause Chicago to continue the bad behavior that got the CTA in this position in the first place.
And is that your main concern then, Senator McClure, that attached with that $500 million has nothing to do with them actually cleaning up their act, we'll call it then? There's no anything put in place that says, hey, we're going to give you this dollar amount, but we need you to stretch it for this length of time or whatever the case might be. Does that concern you most when it comes to just handing somebody $500 million that they're already not doing well with?
Well, my main concern about it is you're taking away money that people are from a tax that people are paying on gas and giving it to something that has nothing to do with gas. And so all of us pay a user fee when we fill up our tanks. And now, instead of the majority of that money going to repair roads and bridges out of the sales tax, now it all goes to Chicago for transit authority funding, which is a mess. So that's the main problem, is stealing from all of us to pay for the Chicago mass transit. The second issue is that when it's being done, it's not being done in a way that causes Chicago to clean up their act. Instead, they're going to just double down what they're already doing, which is a major problem.
Well, and that gas tax already at, I believe, the second highest in the union behind only California. So, and I believe that's also got kind of an annual hike built into it already anyway. And so,
well, but Grayson, it's double taxation actually. So there's two things happening right now. So we pay a gas tax, and that gas tax money is not what's going to Chicago. The gas tax money is what's going to fund roads, bridges, etc. but we're actually taxed twice on gas. We're taxed just for the gas itself, and then we're taxed as a gas sales tax. So it's by percentage. So we're even, so we're taxed twice. So they're stealing the gas tax on the sales tax for gasoline. It's very, it's kind of complicated, but the regular gas tax happens, and then you're taxed overall on your gas tax and on how much you're paying for gas on the gas sales tax. And so that gas sales tax money is what's being stolen. The other regular gas tax money we're still getting used in roads. So it's really complicated, Grayson. But long story short, we're getting robbed of a significant portion of funds that should be going to our roads and bridges that will no longer go to our roads and bridges.
Oh man, I did not realize that was kind of a twofold deal there when it came to that. And on top of that, if that other fund is still going to be in place for our roads and bridges and everybody's roads and bridges, what is it now? Just a CTA tax, I guess, almost when it comes to the gas sales tax side of it. Anything else that you would like to tell us about this transit bill, Senator McClure, now that it has been signed into law?
No, I would just say that it's really important for all of us to understand that we're one state, and I think when the governor robs most of the geographic areas of the state to pay for one small portion of the state, I think that's wrong. And you'll hear the governor all the time when you've got downstate legislators that talk about Chicago or talk about the suburbs or whatever. Governor Pritzker will say, "We are one state." Well, this behavior really tries to pit one part of the state against the other part of the state, and that's wrong about this bill as well. And Governor Pritzker needs to practice what he preaches. If we are one state, then treat us like one state. Don't show favor to one part of the state over the rest of the state, and that's unfortunately what Governor Pritzker is doing with this bill.
And it just we've talked about it, but to know that it is now in place is a totally different ballgame. So I'm glad that is where we started. There was one other bill that we've talked about as well, and it comes to the assisted suicide bill. Now, all things aside, when it comes to morals and things like that, obviously there are some folks on either side of the aisle that are probably not going to love it just based on what they believe. But for you, Senator McClure, this assisted suicide bill, it's now a thing. And what are you making of it now that it is going to start to slowly creep in on, everyday life, I guess?
Well, the first thing that got my attention was that Governor Pritzker initially said he wasn't sure if he was going to sign it or not. And then he signed it pretty quickly. And that's kind of been a running trend with Governor Pritzker is he'll say one thing publicly, but in the meantime, he's already making other plans privately. And I don't think that's fair to the citizens of our state when you've got a governor who's not being candid publicly. It's and I think that's it's a frustration for a lot of people. Supposedly, when the governor met with the Pope, this was one of the topics that did come up. I don't know what was said during that conversation, but the governor obviously signed the bill. And, a lot of people have ideas about what is in this bill versus what isn't in this bill. And what's outlined in the bill is actually something very different from a lot of people think. So I think some people assume that someone's on their deathbed, they're going to die any day, and you just come in and a doctor kind of either injects medication or somehow kills the patient that way. And that's not how the bill works. What it does, it says that if someone's been diagnosed with a terminal condition that's going to kill them within 6 months, they've got to be diagnosed by 2 separate doctors. Then they've got to verbally and via a written document state that it's their wish to kill themselves, and then the doctor can write a prescription if they assess that this person is of sound mind and body to make a decision. Well, lots of times when someone's going to die, they don't know 6 months in advance, and if they're suffering and they're in a bad position, they don't so many times they're not able to communicate or understand what's happening. And so I think a lot of the cases where someone advocates for assisted suicide, this bill doesn't apply. So I do think it's important for us to have the conversation that people understand what the bill does and doesn't do. That being said, I think Governor Pritzker has really championed a culture of death in our state, whether it's abortion up to the moment of birth, to now the assisted suicide bill, and also I'd even add in there the lack of empathy for crime victims and murder victims and all the things that's happening in our state as far as with criminals. And so this is just kind of par for the course with Governor Pritzker. It's really sad. It's terrible, in my view, that the governor has been so, I guess, has shown such lack of concern for the sanctity of life in our state.
And my concern with it is that, yes, you have to get the 2 doctors, but I mean, if I'm really pushing to end my life, how many people are going to turn me away from that potentially, and things of that nature? And also, it's kind of a foot in the door. It feels like, now we're talking about a 6-month time frame. It's got to be a terminal condition. We got to have 2 doctors, but who's to say eventually down the road that there's not such stipulations? And so we'll have to just continue to monitor that. And that's why we talk to State Senator Steve McClure once a month at the bare minimum to get filled in on those things. We'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll talk more with him. This time around, we want to talk about that Michael Jordan and NASCAR case. Steve actually got eyes on the ground with that, or boots on the ground with that. And so we'll come back with him and we'll talk a little bit about that. You're listening to WTIM, your information station, and our morning show brought to you by People's Bank and Trust and Landmark of Taylorville.
Your information station. WTIM.
"24 hours a day. Set a button for Genuine Country 94.3 WMKR and keep it country."
Just Beds are the yawn exterminators, and they can give you a better night's sleep. Choose from Bemco, Chatham & Wells, Sealy, Simmons, and Tempur-Pedic. Find out the many models and styles available on their updated website by clicking their icon at TaylorvilleDailyNews.com.
WTIM AM, FM, and online on the WTIM mobile app and Amazon Alexa is your ag information station with over 8 hours a day of agriculture programming and our own local farm broadcaster. Tune in to WTIM, your ag information station.
And we're back with the WTIM Morning Show here on your information station and brought to you by People's Bank and Trust, where they put people first, and Landmark of Taylorville. I'm your host, Grayson Bauman. Back around in this segment, I've got State Senator Steve McClure. We touched on the transit bill and the assisted suicide bill that made their way to the governor's desk and have now been signed into law. Something of note here in the second segment, though, is Steve was there for the Michael Jordan NASCAR case, or at least the first day of it. And this is where we turn to Steve to tell us what's going on exactly with this case, and what'd you see in the courtroom?
Sure, yeah, Grayson. It's a pretty interesting case, and it was not televised. And the only way that you could see what was happening was if you were actually in court, like I was. And so I was there for the jury selection, and then the opening statements, and then I was also there for Denny Hamlin's testimony for the first part of the testimony. And I mean, first of all, the case itself was interesting because basically Michael Jordan and 23XL Racing, and also I think there were some other racing teams involved in the lawsuit, were suing NASCAR, saying that NASCAR is operating an illegal monopoly and also being very unfair to the drivers. And obviously the first thing that happens in a trial is you pick the jury. But just think about how difficult it is in North Carolina, this was in Charlotte, to find a jury that could be fair and impartial when one of the plaintiffs is Michael Jordan, who, played for University of North Carolina, one of the most famous people in the world. I mean, everybody grew up, at least from my era, with Michael Jordan posters on the wall and, watching the Chicago Bulls. And what's funny is when they're starting to select the jurors, the judge asked them, do any of you either dislike Michael Jordan so much or love Michael Jordan so much that you can't be fair and impartial in this case? If that's the case, raise your hand. And a couple of them raise their hands. And he goes to the first one. He starts asking him some questions, and it's obvious that he's too big of a Michael Jordan fan to be fair. So then the guy gets up. He says, "Okay, sir, thank you very much. You're dismissed." So he gets up. He starts walking by the table where the attorneys are sitting, and then he goes by the table. Michael Jordan's sitting right behind that table in the first row of chairs, and he does like a pump. He pumps his fist at Michael Jordan, like, "Yeah, man,"
Oh.
And it was kind of surreal because you don't really see a juror try to interact with one of the plaintiffs after they've been dismissed. But it's you really wonder. I mean, really, how fair and impartial can you be when Michael Jordan is 10 feet away from you during the trial? And then the opening statements began, and they were like 75 minutes apiece. So the first opening statements were given by the plaintiffs, and they laid out their case against NASCAR, but they introduced every single plaintiff, and it was a handful of them, including Michael Jordan. So they reintroduced him again. So he's talking to the jury, and he says, and now Michael Jordan stands up and kind of buttons his suit, and he's 10 feet away from these people, and they're like looking right at him, and he's waving, and he says, nods his head as they introduce him. I'm thinking to myself, how can anybody win this case against Michael Jordan?
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't you feel some sort of pressure? So anyway, so that was kind of what was going on, and then the defense gave their opening statement. Excuse me. And what's funny is one of the points that was made by the NASCAR team was that you can race anywhere if you want to, and they talked about the Chicago street race, which I was at because I was there because of Justin Allgaier, who was one of my constituents, who's a great Xfinity race car driver and won the Xfinity championship. And so it was funny that they brought that up, and both sides really presented an interesting case. And so and then I watched Denny Hamlin's testimony. He got emotional. He started kind of crying at one point, talking about the health of his parents and things. Anyway, long story short, it was a very interesting case. We'll never know how the jury would have ruled because in the middle of the trial, they did settle the case. I was not there for that. But it was pretty interesting. It makes you really think about how tough it is to try a case involving such a famous person. It's very,
my.
very tricky.
Yeah, Michael Jordan, the greatest of all time, to look him in the eye 10 feet away and pretend that you're going to be impartial is pretty tough deal, I am sure. But such a cool experience for you, Senator McClure, and I'm glad we got to talk about it here, and glad that we got to talk to you here today.
No, it's always good to talk to you, Grayson.
Well, thank you. That is State Senator Steve McClure joining us here on the WTIM Morning Show. We'll be back with more in just one moment.